All right, so we are recording, and we'll go ahead and get started. And Catherine and Matthew, if you just, as we're going along, if you have specific questions, feel free to ask. If what you're seeing is very different than what I'm showing, let me know, because library settings can impact how stuff shows up in different libraries depending on how you have it set up. So if you're not seeing an exact copy of what I'm doing, feel free to unmute yourself and just chime in immediately. Those of you watching the recording, if you do find that you have questions as you're going through and trying to follow along, feel free to reach out and I'm happy to help you with the closeout process, sort of at a more asynchronous pace. But we'll go ahead and get started. So basically today we are going to be doing the actual closeout. Now, if you have not actually completed all the steps to prepare for closeout, that's what we met back in April to discuss. That's okay. You don't have to close out today, but I'm going to walk through the process. And if you're ready to go, join me. And if you're not quite ready to go, that's all right. You can follow along and make sure that you understand the process. And then when you're ready to actually push the buttons, you can push the buttons. So we are going to start today by just discussing what the fiscal year closeout is. We are going to create new funding sources. I'll just walk through the process of doing that. Most libraries do not create new ones every year, but some do. So I will remind everyone of the process of how to do that. We can create some new funds if we need to. And then we will apply credit and allocate those funds. Let me just make sure that I have the chat up and visible to myself. All right. So we're going to walk through each step of this process and follow along with what you need to do. And if you don't need to do something, if you know you don't need to create a new funding source this year, that's okay. That is completely up to what your process is. If you're not sure if you should or not, feel free to ask. And then, of course, there'll be time for questions as we go, but also at the end. So the main thing of what we're going to do today is the end of year procedure. So we're going to start with that. So back in April, we discussed sort of the housekeeping steps that needed to be taken to get to this point, making sure that your invoices are all closed and ready, making sure that you don't have any pending orders or anything like that. Now, if you are in a situation where you do have pending orders and your financial overseers allow you to roll over encumbrances, that's fine. It is possible to do that, and I'll walk through that process. However, if you are not able to roll over encumbrances, then you do need to make sure that you have either canceled or received any pending orders before you can begin the closeout. So that's kind of the most important thing in terms of preparing for the closeout, is making sure that you don't have any encumbered funds. And if you do, that you are able to roll those over. So we're going to start by just diving in and taking a look at the funds administration interface. That's where this entire process happens. So from the staff client under administration, you'll just come down here to acquisitions administration and we'll come into fund administration. So this is where we need to be in order to do our closeout. And I was going to do Smithfield this time. So I am in the dev database, so I'll be doing some actual closeouts, but if your library is impacted by any of those, just know that the impact is not real, that it's all happening in dev, so none of this is happening live. So what we're going to do at this point is taking a look at the funds. Right now, I have this set at a default level to show me 10 rows. I'm going to increase that so I can see every fund that I have. So these are all of the funds that are going to be closed out. It is not possible to close out funds one at a time. So once you're ready for the closeout, you need to be ready for the entire closeout. So if you do have a large number of funds, it may take you a little while to get ready for that step. Like I said, the biggest part of that is simply making sure your purchase orders are in a good state. But it does help to kind of take a look at the funds, make sure, you know, in this particular case, if you've got a very large negative balance, understanding where that's coming from. You may want to do some reallocations in order to fix that. So for example, I went over in nonfiction and graphic novels, but I'm way under in large print and YA. So I may want to reallocate some of the money that I have in large print and YA up to these negative balances. So I'm going to do that first. I'm going to click on one of these that has a negative balance, and I'm going to come in here and transfer and click transfer money. Oh, no, I need to start in the one I'm transferring from. So I'm going to come here to large print and open that up, and I'm going to come to transfers and transfer money. I'm going to select the non-fiction from Smithfield 2025. And I'm going to just pull over $1,079. That should cover it. Transferred from large print. Close that, and now I no longer have that negative balance here for nonfiction. I can do the same thing to kind of balance out my graphic novel fund. I'll take that from YA, so I'll click into the young adult fund. I'll go into transfers. There's nothing that's been transferred so far. I'll click transfer money, and I'm going to put this into graphic 2025. And we're going to put 3539 transferred from YA to graphic novels. So I've completed that transfer, and now looking at this, now that is no longer a negative balance. This is not something you have to do. In fact, your financial department may not want you to do that. So, but if it is a situation where you do need to balance those sheets at the end of the year, you will need to do this before closeout. So just check with what your financial requirements are and make sure that what you're kind of finishing the year with is reflective of how that money was actually spent. So, you know, if you have one big pool of money from your county and you put that into funds however you think you're going to spend it, and then at the end of the year, it turns out you've overspent in one category and underspent in another, it may be that the best practice for just making sure that everything balances is to move from the underspent fund into the overspent fund. But again, that is based on what your local requirements and needs are. I am going to go ahead and leave this one negative just so you see what happens at a closeout with a negative balance in case you're going to be closing out any negative balances, you're aware. So that's sort of the first step, is just doing that cleanup, double checking that all of your funds are here, they're all active, and then also making sure that any fund you want for next year is set to propagate. So in this case, I'm looking down this propagate column and I see that every fund, all 13 of them, are set to propagate. If I wanted to have the exact same 13 funds next year, that's exactly what I want to see. If, for example, I decided that this memorial fund, maybe this was just a one-time gift and we don't actually want to have it again next year, I may want to change that. So I could come into this one and I could edit. So when we went to transfer that balance, we just clicked on the name of the fund, and that opened up that window in which we could transfer and take a look at debits and all that kind of stuff. That's not what we want to do for this. To reset propagate, instead what we want to do is select it and choose edit either from the action menu, or I think you can right click it as well. So choose edit, and we're going to come here and we're going to turn propagate to no. So if there are any funds that you do not want to take with you into next year, you'll want to turn that propagate off before your closeout. So you can see now that I have yes all the way down the line until I get to this 13th one, and that one's a no. I also want to double check my rollovers. So if you roll money over, so if you have unspent balances that you can take into next fiscal year, you do want this set to true. If you roll over encumbrances but not balances, you also want this set to yes. So there's an additional setting that has to be set up for your library. If it is not, you'll be able to see in a moment what that looks like. If it's not and you need it to be, meaning you need to be able to roll your encumbrances over to next fiscal year, let me know. We'll get that set up for you. But if you're doing any type of rollover, whether it is a balance rollover or simply an encumbrance rollover, you do need to have this set to yes. Just so you see the difference between one that is a rollover and one that's not, I'm going to go ahead and set one of these to rollover. So let's do fiction. And again, we'll edit, and I'm going to change my rollover on this one from no to yes. And we'll save that. So you see now this is showing as yes in this rollover column. All right, so that's the basic kind of housekeeping side of things. I've checked my balances. If it was appropriate for me to transfer money in order to avoid negative balances, I've done that. If there are any funds that I do not want next year, I've turned propagate off for those. If there are any funds that I want to roll over money to cover, or that unspent balances or anything, or that I want to roll over encumbrances, I've got that set to yes. So I'm going to give everybody a moment to just take a look at their own funds. And make sure that everything looks the way you want it to, that you're propagating what you want to propagate, you're rolling over what you want to roll over, you're not rolling over what you don't want to roll over, and if there are any balances that need to be adjusted, and you feel comfortable that you can do that, go ahead and do so. So I'll just give a few minutes, and if you have questions, please feel free to ask either in chat or unmute yourself. All right, and while you do that, I'll go ahead and just talk a little bit more detail about propagation and rollover. Those of you who have been working in acquisitions for years, hopefully are familiar with these terms, but those of you who are new to it or who only do this one thing each year may need a refresher. So propagation is just the ability to recreate the same funds with the same settings in the new fiscal year. So you can have propagate set to no across the board, and then each year completely start from scratch creating the same funds again. The end result will be the same. You will have the same funds, you will have the same settings, and there won't be any issues with how any of that works. However, that's an awful lot of work. So if you are going to be using the same fund, so if you have adult fiction each year, then you probably do want to go ahead and propagate that. So all you're doing is automatically creating a new fund. You're not carrying that fund forward. If I go back and look at 2024, I can see that there was an adult fiction or just a fiction fund in 2024, the same as there was in 2025. So, there's no reason not to propagate if you're just going to be using the same funds again. So that's what I recommend that you do is propagate. In terms of rollover is a little trickier. Most libraries do not do the rollover option. Rollover has two aspects to it. The general one is that you roll over unspent money and encumbrances into the next fiscal year, which means that if you have, for example, in this large print even with transferring some of the money from the large print fund into the nonfiction fund, I still have almost $4,000 unspent here. If my county allows me to take that money forward and just add this $3,855 to my budget for next year on top of the money they've already allocated for me, then I can roll this money over. It's automatically going to be applied to this account. Most counties don't allow that, so most of our libraries do not roll anything over. However, there's also a secondary form of rollover where you roll over only encumbrances. And this is what I mentioned earlier, where there's a sort of a separate setting. If this is something you need to do, then we do need to make sure you're set up for it. And it basically just allows you to choose to roll over encumbrances. So any money that is currently earmarked for a specific transaction but hasn't yet been spent, hasn't been debited, once that debit goes through, it will show up in next year's fund. So it was originally encumbered in 2025. But once it's actually debited, it will be debited from the same fund in 2026. So if that's something that you need set up, let me know. Many of our libraries already have it set up. So, it's very possible you already do if you need it. And I'll show you how to check that in just a moment. All right. Anybody run into anything odd with checking their balances or trying to change propagate or rollover settings or anything like that? All right, well, let's go ahead and move on to the next step. And if you do still have questions about this step, we can always come back to it. Oh, that's fine, Matthew. You're welcome to use the chat rather than unmuting. That'll work just fine. All right, so once you feel confident that all of your funds are in the state they need to be to close out, you can go ahead and do the closeout. So the way that you do this is quite simple. You just click this fiscal propagation and rollover button. It's not called a closeout button. It's not called a, end of year button or anything like that. It's just a fiscal propagation and rollover button. And that confused the heck out of me when I first started learning to do this. But technically, that's really what we're doing here. We're propagating and rolling over. As we do that, we'll also be closing things out, but that Evergreen views that as sort of the secondary task here. You do not need to select your funds. Everything will be propagated and rolled over based on their settings when you perform this action. So there are 13 here. I'm going to close out 13 when I click this button. Not immediately, but that'll be the end result. So I'm going to go ahead and click fiscal propagation and rollover. The first thing I need to do is set my my fiscal year. Now, I have already set up in production the 2026 fiscal year. I set that up in here too, but for some reason I cannot get it to show up in this dropdown. I'm not really sure why. I It was very frustrating though, so I stopped trying eventually. So for the purposes of this closeout, I'm just going to close out to 2025. When you close out for real, in production, you're going to see 2026 here. In fact, I'm going to open production and show that to you. So if I go into acquisitions administration and fund administration, and we will look at the exact same library, and I click fiscal propagation and rollover, I have 2026 here. So if your library is currently in a year you designate as the 2025 fiscal year, then you will be closing out and propagating to the 2026 fiscal year. So that's what you want to choose from this menu. Now, if your library is in the 2024 fiscal year this year, you'll be propagating to 2025. So you'll choose 2025. Basically, you're going to choose whichever year is sequentially next based on your naming convention, whether you choose the sort of first half of the year as your name or the second half, you'll choose the appropriate year from that. Let me close this so that I don't accidentally close out for real. So I'm going to choose 2025 here. If I was doing this in production, I'd be choosing 2026. Now, most well, no, probably about half of our libraries, um, either have a single branch where all of their funds are owned, or they have the funds are owned at the system level. If that's the case, then you'll want to make sure that you're scoped appropriately. So there are basically three ways that you can make sure that you're scoped appropriately. If your library does all funds at the system level, you want to put your system in the scoping box here. You want to click the or you don't need to click the descendants button because everything will show up here. I believe Onslow is one. Yes, so Onslow, the system owns all the funds. So when you scope to Onslow, which is the system, all of the funds show up here without checking any boxes. If I click fiscal propagation and rollover, I do not need to click include funds from descendant org units. I will be propagating the funds owned at Onslow, and all of the funds are owned at Onslow. Now, if my library owns all funds at the branch level, but only one branch owns funds, then I can do one of two things. I can either scope to the system and choose descendants. So in this case, I do have one that's not Smithfield. And so I can choose, let's pretend Kenley's not there. I can scope to my system. I can view my descendants. I'm going to see all of my funds here. And when I do my fiscal propagation, I would choose include funds from descendant org units. So that would then close out everything at the Johnston level and at the Smithfield level. I don't think we have any libraries that own some funds at the system and some at branches, but if you did, this is how you would do that. You would close out your system level as well as any descendant org units. So Matthew, you don't see 2025 in the fiscal propagation pop up? Is that correct? Okay, that should be showing up for you, and I'm not sure why it is. Give me a moment to double check that. I'm going to switch my workstation real quick. So this is what you should be seeing, and if you're not seeing this, I'm not sure why. I thought it might be related to working location, but that doesn't seem to be the case as I switched my working location. I will dig into that for you. I'm not going to do it in the middle of this call because I have no idea how long that's going to end up taking, but I will put that, I'll remind myself to do that as soon as we're done here. Do you see anything else besides 2025? Like, do you skip from 2024 to 2026 and just skip 2025 altogether? So 2024 is the only thing that's showing up in here. You don't see any of the older ones either? Okay, so it's 2024 is the last year. All right, I will take a look at that and I will be in touch. All right, so with scoping, if you are in a system where the system owns all the funds, you want to be scoped to your system, and then you do not need to click this box. If you are in a system where all the funds are owned at a single branch, you may scope to the system and check this box, or you may just scope to the branch. And I'd probably recommend doing that, but just in case, you know, you have a situation like this one where it turns out Kenley does have a single fund and you want to take care of that fund, then in that case, you would probably want to do your system level and then include funds from descendant org units. If you are in a system where every branch owns funds or multiple branches own funds, you have two choices. If you are the one doing the entire closeout, then you would want to scope to the system and choose to include funds from descendant org units. Let's take a look at Northwestern. So in the case of Northwestern, there are funds owned by a large number of different branches. If everything's being closed out centrally, then you would scope to Northwestern, you would click fiscal propagation and rollover, and then you would click include funds from descendant org units. And that's going to close out everything across Northwestern owned at the branch level. If each branch closes out individually, so there is one person at King who closes out, one person at Elkin who closes out, then you would scope to the branch level. And you would only close out for that branch. So you click fiscal propagation and rollover, and your context org unit here is Elkin, which means that is what is being closed out. So you, even if one person does all the closeouts, if you want to separate them just, for your own mental cleanliness, and just sort of do one branch at a time, you can do that as well. So it's all about how you've scoped it. For the purposes of this demonstration, I'm going to come on back to Smithfield, and we're just going to close Smithfield. If you are not sure the best way to do the closeout for your particular library, feel free to reach out and I will take a look at how your funds are set up, probably ask you a bunch of questions and figure out the best way to move forward. But for this one, I'm going to just go ahead and scope to Smithfield, and I'm going to leave it at that. I do not need to include funds from descendant org units because there are none. I'm at the branch level already, so there's nothing descending further from there. So we figured out our scoping. The next thing we want to do is figure out what our rollover looks like. So I said earlier, if your library is already set up to rollover encumbrances, you'll know. This is the point where you'll know because you will see this option here to limit fiscal year closeout to encumbrances. If you have this set up already, you'll see this option. If you don't have it set up, you won't see this option. You'll only see the perform fiscal year closeout option. So if you want to roll over encumbrances and you don't see this option, let me know and I'll get that set up for you. If you don't want to roll over encumbrances and you do see this option, that's fine. Just don't check the box. We're going to check 3 boxes for this demonstration. Everyone, regardless of what you're doing with rollover, is going to check perform fiscal year closeout and dry run. If you are rolling over encumbrances and you are set up to do so, you may also check this box. And so that would take any encumbrances forward into next year. All right, so we are doing a dry run. That means that nothing's actually going to happen as a result of this, but I will be given information about what would happen if I were to do this for real. In order to do the dry run, I do need to make sure that I've checked both of these boxes. If I just check the dry run and I don't check the fiscal year closeout, then I will propagate new funds, but I won't close my old funds. I want to close my old funds. I don't want to keep those active, partially because every time I go to create a purchase order and I have to choose my fund, any active fund will show up for me, and that will become a very long list if I'm not closing out all my old funds. Partially, I want to make sure that there's no chance that I'm accidentally going to use an old fund to make a purchase. And partially it's for just sort of bookkeeping purposes. Once a fund is no longer active, it needs to reflect that. So I've checked both of these boxes. I'm going to click process. And if you have a lot more funds than I do, then you are that's going to take a lot longer. In this case, with only 13 funds, it was fairly quick. So you see that I have rolled over to 2026, which is interesting, even though I only had 2025 here. That makes me think that the year I'm choosing here is the closing year, not the year I'm propagating to. So I believe, yep, I think that must be what's going on. So that's why you weren't seeing it there, Matthew. And so I apologize for that. So basically you're going to select your current year from this drop down, not the year you're propagating to. So I apologize for that. So Yes, we have rolled over, we've tested our rollover to 2026. In this dry run, we see that 12 funds will propagate to the new fiscal year. That makes sense because I had 13 and I had one set to no for propagate. So only 12 are being propagated. I'm not rolling over any unspent money to next year, which makes sense because I have rollover set to no for every fund that has money that has a remaining balance. Now my fiction fund rollover is set to yes, but its balance is negative. So it doesn't have money to roll over for next year. So that makes sense. No unspent money has been rolled over. However, because I do have this option to limit my fiscal year closeout to encumbrances, I have rolled over $4,129.20 in encumbrances to next year. And so that's going to, I'd have to go into my actual funds and figure out where there are encumbrances and everything to understand which ones are rolling over those encumbrances. And I can do that at this point, or I can do that actually after my closeout. If I feel like this is what I want to see, like this is exactly what I want to look at for next year, then I can take the dry run off. I can do it for real. If I want to come in and make some changes, maybe I want to turn rollover on for one of these. Let's say that I've been given permission from my county to take this $3,800 with me into next year. I can come here and I could set my rollover to yes. And so now when I propagate, I'm actually going to not limit because I want to roll over everything. Now I have quite a lot of money has rolled over, and I'm not entirely sure because that is more than I had in that particular account that I set rollover to yes for. So I believe it's picking up some extra money and maybe rolling over everything. So I'm going to have to look into that more closely before in order to understand exactly what's happening. What I'm going to say for now is that I don't think anyone really does roll over anything, so I think you'll be okay. If anybody does roll money forward and understands what's happening, let me know. If anybody does roll money forward and would like to figure out what's happening, I will let you know once I've figured it out. I'm going to put this limit back on and see what happens. Okay, so now the same thing that happened during my first dry run has happened in that no money at all was rolled forward. And the same number in encumbrance was. All right. If everyone is in a position where they are ready to do this for real, if they plan to do this for real, then we'll go ahead and do that. If anybody has any questions, let's take care of those before we move forward. Right. Well, let's go ahead and do this. All we have to do it for real is unclick dry run. And I get this alert. We'll do a closeout for real. So it's reminding me that I can double check with the dry run. I've already done that. So I feel confident in what's going to happen. And I'm going to go ahead and click process. This may take just a little bit longer than the dry run did. It was actually pretty quick. I see that little green box popped up in the bottom right saying rollover succeeded. I close. Then looking here at 2025, I see that everything here now says it is not active with the exception of the memorial fund, which is the one that I did not propagate. So I could come in here and I could edit it and turn it and deactivate it manually. If it's some sort of gift fund, and that's why you're not propagating it, and it still has a few months left to spend out of, go ahead and keep it open. There's nothing saying you have to close this out at the end of this fiscal year. Close it out whenever you are done with it. But I do recommend closing it out when the time comes. So I'm going to go ahead and close that out now by simply deactivating it. And I'll save it. And so now nothing from 2025 is active. But I can come over here to my year and I can click on my little filter and I can change this to 2026. And now I see that I have 12 funds that are active for 2026. None of them have a balance. That makes sense. I didn't end up rolling over any balances. If I go into any of them, let's take a look at graphic novels. See if I can figure out where some of those encumbrances are. Looks like my encumbrances were in the fiction fund. I still have $4,129 of encumbered money in fiction, and that was what rolled over when I did the actual propagation. So if you are rolling over encumbrances, I do recommend adding the total encumbered to your grid. Go ahead and save that so that you can just see where that encumbrance rolls over. But that is basically the process. It's a little nerve-wracking sometimes, but it's fairly straightforward. So, you know, there is not an exact timeline to do the end of year rollover, right? It's not required, but you can't start spending for next year until you've done this. So if you're, you know, if you don't tend to get money to start spending for next year until September, even though it's technically this fiscal year, you may not need to worry about this until September. If you will have money ready to spend starting July 1st, you probably want to make sure that this closeout is done on June 30th. Just for the sake of the recording, there was a question in chat about if there is an exact timeline for the end of year closeout, and officially there's not. You know, if you spend time digging back through some of the history of what's happening in acquisitions here, you'll find that a lot of people just don't ever close out. Please do close out though. Wanangwa says that she did the rollover before finishing closing all the POs and it messed up her final balances. So definitely recommend until you wait until you've closed everything out. And I echo that. Yes, you definitely want to make sure that if you are still waiting for items, unless you're able to roll over those encumbrances and willing to kind of deal with what that does to your balances, you want to make sure that you have received every item prior to closing out. Or if it's, you know, if you really need to set up funds for next year and you've got some items that are back ordered and you're not going to get them for several months, I would suggest actually canceling them so that you can sort of close out those POs and then setting up a new order for it for next year. How you deal with that is kind of up to you locally, but yeah, do not close out until you're ready. All right. So after closing out, you just kind of want to go through the checklist, make sure that everything that you expected to propagate has propagated, that your encumbrances are blank unless you rolled them over, your balances are zero unless you rolled balances forward, that last year's funds are now not active, and then this year's funds are active, and I keep meaning to change this. This is not negative. Your total balance should be zero. You should not have a balance for this year unless you rolled money forward, in which case it will be negative. That takes us to starting a new year. So any other final questions about that closeout process? All right, well, steps to setting up a new fiscal year. The biggest step is simply creating your new funds, which we've done by propagation. However, if you have additional funds that you need to create that were not created via propagation, this is when you would do that. Additionally, if you do a new funding source each year, this would be the time to set that up, and you'd want to do that prior to setting up your new funds. So let's go ahead and do that. So I am going to go within the fund administration interface. I'm going to click on funding sources, and I'm going to start. Oh, I'm not scoped properly. I'm going to start by removing my general donation fund. I know what the is. Okay, my big funding source, I'm going to go ahead and close that. I'm going to say that this was last year's funding source, and I'm going to start a new one for each fiscal year. Some libraries choose to do it this way. Some libraries just use the same one over and over again and just reallocate every year. If that's the case, you can skip this step altogether. But I'm going to show how you would close this out. So I'm going to come in here and edit selected, just slightly cut off in my menu. I'm not sure why. I'm going to make it not active. Save it. And so now nothing's showing up in here. I'm going to click new funding source, and I'm going to call this my funding source for this year. I'm going to make sure it's active, set to US dollars, and because I keep getting switched back to PAC, make sure that I am set to the right org unit, which should not be a problem for any of our libraries, just for me. So I'll save that, and now I have my funding source for 2026 ready to go. So it's as simple as that. And if you do not need to create a new funding source for this year, then don't. Simply continue working with the one that you have. Now, whether you are creating a new funding source or using the same one, the next step is to add money to that. So I'm going to select it. And from my action menu, I'm going to apply credit. So let's say that I get $500 from my big funding source. And I'm going to make this effective July 1st through next year, 2026, June 30th. So I'll save that. And now I have $50,000 that I may allocate out to my funds. So if I come back into my funds tab, let's make sure that we're in the correct year. I'll see that my 2026 funds do not yet have a balance, which means they don't have any money. And I am going to, so I need to actually take that money in my funding source and apply it out, allocate it out to my funds. So I'm just going to go one fund at a time. And I will click on the fund name and I will create an allocation. I'll choose my funding source. And I will, let's give $2,000. And so now I have $2,000 that I can put towards purchases from this fund. And I would just continue going back, showing up in my balances. I would go through and just do that to each fund. And of course, you'll see that I've already encumbered $4,000 of this $5,000 for this year, leaving me really with a combined balance of $870. So I've already basically spent my fiction fund for this year in this example. So I just do that until all of my funds have funds. So that is the process of making sure that you have money to spend for next year. So again, I'm going to give everybody, if you have closed out and you're ready to do this, the opportunity to do it now. If you have not yet closed out, that's okay. You do not need to do this yet, but you'll know the process. But if I'll give you a few minutes to explore it. All right, is anybody attempting this? And if so, is anybody running into anything odd or have any questions? All right, so let's just do a quick recap. The process of the closeout was fairly straightforward. You'll start by scoping to whatever level your funds are owned at. So again, you can start at the um, system level. And if you own many funds at many branches, you're going to see all of those as long as you set descendants to be visible. You can also check at the actual branch level. And then you'll only see those owned by that branch. So depending on how you have it set up is how you want to scope. That scoping will impact the closeout. So just make sure that you're scoped appropriately. Once you've scoped, you'll hit fiscal, you'll double check that everything is showing up the way you want it to, that the balances are correct, that if you do need to reallocate or transfer money in order to cover negative balances, you've done that. You may not need to do that, even if you have negative balances, that's fine. It's not necessary for the closeout. It's just for the sake of how your bookkeeping needs to be done. Make sure that everything that you wish to propagate has propagate set to yes. Anything that you wish to roll over, that got a little dicey, so I'm going to look into that and see if I can figure out what was going on with rollovers. But anything that you wish to roll over is set correctly as well. If you do not wish to roll over, then those should all say no. Once you've made sure everything's correct there, then you'll hit the fiscal propagation and rollover. You'll choose the year you're closing out, and then you'll choose the perform fiscal year closeout and the dry run. If in doing this, you want to roll over your encumbrances, you may also choose this. One thought I'm having right now is if, as discussed a few minutes ago, you don't want to close things out yet, but you do want to go ahead and propagate your new funds. I believe you can do that by checking, by not checking the perform fiscal year closeout. So the funds will propagate once you click process, and that'll give you all of your new funds, but it will not close out your old funds. So I think that's what's going to happen. Let's go ahead and give that a try. Yes, so you can propagate your new funds without closing out your old funds if you are in a situation where you need to kind of keep some things open until your orders have all come through. So that is going to be an option for you, Matthew, if that's something you need to do. But I would ask, once you have finished those orders, do go back in and close out, like manually deactivate each of the funds that were not closed before in order to avoid having that sort of buildup of active funds from previous fiscal years. So just make sure that you are closing out, but it looks like you can propagate without closing if you need to. Anyway, our recap, once you're ready, you'll come in here, you'll perform your fiscal year closeout. If you do not have dry run checked, then this is going to be happening for real, which means that, you know, you'll need to be prepared for everything to close and everything to propagate as set. You'll click process and that will conduct that process for you. Afterwards, double check that you have all the funds that you want, that they are showing the correct balances based on how you have rollover set, whether or not you did any rollover. In most cases, that's going to be a balance of 0. At that point, if you need to create a new funding source, you can go ahead and do so in the funding sources tab. Deactivate any old funding sources at that point if that is if that's part of your process. Once you've done that, then you can apply credit to that funding source, and then you can just take that that credit and allocate it out to the funds that you created through propagation. You can also create a new fund by clicking this new fund button. And I think we actually did not go through this part of the process, but the process of creating a new fund is fairly straightforward. You'll name it, you'll give it a code. I'd recommend following the convention you have for your existing funds. Make sure you set it to the newly created fiscal year. Make sure that it is owned correctly based on how your system, um, manages ownership. If everything's owned at the system level, follow that same format. If things are owned at the branch level, but it's all one branch, follow the same format. If everything is owned at different branches, then just put it at the appropriate branch. Make sure that it's active, set it to the correct currency type. You can go ahead and set propagate and roll over to yes and no if that's how you know you want it to function for next year. This does not actually matter until closeout. So if you're not exactly sure what you're going to do with this new fund just yet, that's okay. If you want to add a balance stop percent, you may, and that can always be changed. And then you'd save that fund and it would be ready to go for next year. You can apply credit to it as needed. That is the process. Any questions, concerns? Well, so I did record this. I will get the recording processed and placed up on YouTube. So, if you know of colleagues at your library or other libraries who were interested in attending this but couldn't, let them know the recording is forthcoming. I'll get it posted up on YouTube as soon as it's ready to go. And if you do have questions, if you weren't able to actually conduct the closeout today and stuff comes up when you do the closeout, let me know. If you are just a little nervous about it and you want to make sure that everything's set up right, feel free to reach out and I'm happy to kind of take a quick look at your setup before you push the button. Otherwise, best of luck. So Catherine asked if orders that show as open because some items were canceled, will those cause issues when closing everything? They shouldn't, because the cancellation should have unencumbered the funds, so it shouldn't be an issue. If you have a couple of specific ones that you have in mind, you're welcome to send those my way, and I'll just take a quick look at the funds connected to them to make sure that everything's ready. But I don't think that's going to cause a problem. Wanangwa might actually have experienced something like that. I'm not sure. Generally speaking, if it's an acquisitions thing, I ask Wanangwa if she's experienced it. So, yeah, if it's still showing as open, if you've canceled the items, but you're unable to, but you still have that pending status on the purchase order, we can have Mobius basically manually cancel it for you, the purchase order itself, if that's something you need to show, or manually receive it for you, so that it doesn't continue to show as open. So if that's an issue where, okay. Yeah, no, that is a bug that causes a lot of problems. I don't think it impacts this though. Send me the POs that it's happening with, and I may just have to have Mobius go in and manually change its status, because it's all about what the status of the purchase order is really. Um, the line items themselves, I think, are often correct, but the purchase order is not. With this bug, the purchase order is not reflecting correctly. Yeah, as Wanong was saying, it should be, in a situation like that, the purchase order should be marked fully as received, but that is a bug. I've seen that with others. Actually, Matthew's got one of those right now that I'm trying to figure out. I think you'll be fine for the closeout, but send me those purchase orders and I'll double check and I'll have Mobius do a manual status change for it. All right, any other questions or concerns prior to closeout? If you do have any odd purchase orders that you can't get into the right state, any other lingering housekeeping issues, let me know. Just submit a ticket and we'll make sure we've got you cleaned up before you close out. And then you should be good to go. And once you've closed out, if you do have follow-up questions, please let me know. Otherwise, I wish you all a lot of luck with getting this fiscal year ended and starting a brand new one. Thanks for being here today, and I will get this recording out as soon as possible.